Captain Elias Vance had three thoughts as his escape pod tore through the alien sky in a fireball. First, that the ship's emergency system should never have used duct tape as a critical component. Second, that dying in a flaming tin can was probably less dignified than choking on a bad sandwich. And third, that if this was how it ended, at least nobody back home could say he went quietly. The pod shrieked like a dying beast, metal skin blistering as it broke through the atmosphere, and Elias gripped the controls while the onboard AI offered calm, pointless advice about proper crash landing posture. The jungle planet rushed closer in a smear of green and smoke. He braced himself for impact, half laughing, half swearing at the absurdity of it all. When the pod hit, the sound wasn't just a crash, it was a declaration that a new kind of trouble had arrived. The world lurched sideways, then upside down, then mercifully stopped. Elias stumbled out into air thick with humidity, coughing on smoke, knees wobbling as if he just stepped off a roller coaster designed by a psychopath. His jumpsuit was charred, his hair smelled like burned plastic, and he had no idea where he was. But he was alive, which felt like both a miracle and a mistake. The jungle around him hummed with alien life, things buzzing, glowing, and slithering where they had no business existing. The ground squelched under his boots, and distant thunder rumbled like a giant with indigestion. Elias spat dirt out of his mouth and muttered that this was already the worst vacation he'd ever been on. Then came the shouting. Harsh voices barked in an unfamiliar tongue, followed by the unmistakable sound of energy rifles powering up. Figures moved through the underbrush with precise, military efficiency. Elias froze, his instincts screaming to run, though the smoke trail from his crash would have made hiding about as effective as a neon sign. The figures stepped into view, armored scouts, their helmets gleaming, insignias flashing in sharp colors that probably meant something like, "Shoot first, ask questions never." Their leader raised a clawed hand and pointed straight at Elias. The order came sharp and certain. They opened fire. Bolts of searing light tore through the air, sizzling past his head. Elias dove, rolling into mud, yelping as one shot skimmed his shoulder and left a smoking mark on his sleeve. He scrambled behind the ruined pod, heart pounding, lungs burning. The scouts advanced in a disciplined line, each step deliberate, as if they were hunting a dangerous predator rather than a bewildered human who had just lost a wrestling match with gravity. Elias shouted that he wasn't armed, though his voice cracked in panic, making it sound more like a punchline than a plea. The jungle hissed with the energy discharges, trees snapping and ground scorching. He peeked up for just a second too long, and another bolt clipped the pod an inch from his face. His luck was running thinner than the pod's hull. The scouts closed in. One vaulted over the wreckage and leveled their weapon directly at his chest. Elias raised his hands in a gesture that was either surrender or prayer, depending on interpretation. The scout's finger tightened on the trigger. Elias's mind raced with useless final thoughts. How ridiculous it was to die on a planet whose name he didn't even know, how much he hated being right about duct tape, and how profoundly unfair it was that nobody was going to hear his sarcastic last words. The rifle hummed, ready to discharge, when suddenly the air changed. It wasn't just silence. It was an absence, as if the jungle itself had inhaled and held its breath. The scouts faltered, weapons wavering, their confidence bleeding out into unease. The temperature dropped, breath misting in the humid air, shadows twisting unnaturally though the sun still burned above. From the smoke and ruin of the crash stepped a figure draped in black, its cloak shifting like liquid darkness. Its face, if it had one, was hidden beneath a hood where no light dared linger. Even the sounds of the jungle fled its presence. The scouts, disciplined soldiers a moment ago, now looked like children realizing the monster under the bed had stepped into daylight. The figure did not hurry. Each movement was deliberate, inevitable, like the ticking of a clock marking the end of things. It stopped between Elias and the scouts, who now hesitated as though their weapons had turned to lead. Elias, still sprawled in mud, gaped at the apparition with a cocktail of terror and awe. The figure turned its unseen gaze toward him, and for the first time, Elias felt the weight of something vast and eternal pressing against the fragile bubble of his existence. The air itself whispered that here stood the Reaper, the embodiment of endings, the one presence no being in the galaxy dared to challenge. The lead scout found their voice and stammered a demand, something about protocol and forbidden species, their bravado brittle against the looming quiet. Their rifles shook in their grip. The figure tilted its head slightly, and though its face was hidden, the scouts seemed to shrink under its attention. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, until the Reaper finally spoke. Its voice was neither loud nor soft, but it carried like a bell tolling across a graveyard, each word sinking into bone. It said only 4 words, yet they reshaped the air, the jungle, and every mind within earshot. I taught him. The declaration was simple, undeniable, and final. The scouts froze, eyes wide behind their visors. Elias, still trembling in the mud, blinked in disbelief, wondering if he had just been claimed by death itself, or worse, sponsored. The Reaper stood unmoving, a silent sentinel between hunter and hunted, its words echoing long after the sound had faded. And in that moment, Elias understood something dreadful and absurd. Surviving the crash had been the easy part. Now, the real trouble was about to begin. The scouts did not lower their weapons, but their formation broke as fear seeped into their rigid discipline. Elias could see it in the way their knees bent too much, in the nervous flicks of their helmet lenses, in the way their hands twitched against the triggers. They were soldiers who had faced predators, storms, and wars, but standing before the Reaper seemed to strip them of training and leave only instinct. None of them wanted to be the one who fired first. Elias lay in the mud watching all of this, trying to figure out whether he was safer being behind the Reaper or running headfirst into the jungle full of glowing snakes. For now, mud seemed the safest option, though it was doing terrible things to his dignity. The lead scout gathered enough courage to speak. Their voice came through a translator box on the chest plate, carrying a metallic echo that didn't hide the tremor beneath it. By decree of the Galactic Union, humans are forbidden. No human may walk the stars again. The voice quavered on the last word, as though even speaking against the Reaper was a crime. Elias's ears perked up at the word human. Forbidden sounded like a harsh way of saying rare, exotic, and possibly valuable. He almost made a joke about black market kidneys but bit his tongue when the Reaper shifted slightly, reminding him that he was still in the middle of a scene far too serious for his usual commentary. Elias sat up slowly, his hands raised in surrender. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, trying to inject charm into his voice. "The only thing I'm guilty of is crashing spectacularly, which, for the record, I'm very good at." A nervous laugh escaped him, echoing into silence. The scouts did not laugh. They aimed more carefully. Elias sighed and rubbed mud off his face. "Tough crowd," he muttered. One scout growled something guttural, and the translator spat out the words, "Kill him before the curse spreads." The others murmured agreement, though none moved closer. Their hesitation was bound to break, Elias thought, unless the Reaper did something dramatic again. He glanced up at the cloaked figure, who seemed utterly disinterested in the growing tension, like a teacher letting students squabble just to see who failed first. The Reaper finally turned its hood toward the scouts and spoke again, each syllable dropping like a stone into water. "He is under my hand." Those words seemed to push the scouts back physically, as though they'd been struck by a force they couldn't measure. Elias blinked at the phrasing. Under my hand? He wasn't sure whether that meant guardian, servant, or pet. He decided to roll with guardian, because the alternatives were depressing. The scouts exchanged glances and broke into heated whispers. Elias caught fragments through the translator. Prophecy. Forbidden. Under the chains. He squinted, feeling left out of his own death sentence. Chains? Prophecy? Why did interstellar civilizations always seem to have prophecies? He cleared his throat and asked, not very politely, "Can someone please explain why I'm suddenly the galaxy's least popular tourist?" The lead scout barked an order, and 2 others stepped forward. But instead of firing, one opened a small holographic scroll, light flickering in the damp air. It projected an image of a humanoid silhouette wrapped in flame. The scout's voice was steadier now, reciting words clearly memorized. It is written that a human will rise again from ruin, carrying chaos in his shadow. He will undo the Empire's chains and bring the age of collapse. Elias frowned. That's flattering and all, but I assure you, I can't even undo my shoelaces without falling over. The scouts ignored him, continuing their grim recital. No human can be allowed to live, lest the prophecy be fulfilled. Elias threw up his hands. That seems extreme. Couldn't you just, I don't know, ask me nicely not to fulfill it? The Reaper chuckled. The sound was hollow and strange, as if laughter had been buried for centuries and just dug up again. Elias whipped his head toward it, startled. You find this funny? He hissed. The Reaper did not answer, but Elias swore he saw the faintest curve of amusement beneath the hood, though it might have been his imagination. The scouts, however, did not appreciate the humor. They advanced a step closer, rifles humming louder. Elias instinctively backed up until his shoulders hit the wrecked pod, mud sucking at his boots. Panic rose sharp and hot in his chest. He was fast running out of clever remarks, and even faster running out of ground to retreat into. For the first time since the crash, Elias felt the creeping certainty that he might actually die here, prophecy or not. Before the standoff could erupt into fire, one scout broke ranks. Smaller than the rest, helmet dented, their voice cracked as they asked the leader what would happen if the prophecy was true. What if killing the human fulfilled it instead of stopping it? The question hung in the air like smoke. The others stiffened, some visibly unsettled. Elias seized the moment with desperation. Exactly! He exclaimed, seizing on the doubt. You kill me, prophecy fulfilled. You let me live, maybe nothing happens. Honestly, I'm terrible at destiny. Ask anyone who knows me. No one responded, which was understandable since nobody here knew him. Still, the logic made a ripple. The scouts hesitated again, their unity cracking further. Fear of the Reaper and fear of prophecy twisted together, leaving them uncertain which terror outweighed the other. Elias took a deep breath and forced himself to stand, brushing mud off as though preparing for a job interview rather than execution. His legs shook, but he planted them firmly. I'm Elias Vance, he announced, voice steadier than he felt. I don't know about prophecies, empires, or curses, but I do know one thing. I'm not dying today. He wished he had something more profound, but it would have to do. The Reaper tilted its hood toward him approvingly, which was either comforting or horrifying depending on interpretation. The scouts shifted uneasily, the certainty of their mission eroding further. Somewhere deep in the jungle, a roar echoed, long and guttural, reminding them all that this world had dangers beyond prophecies and humans. The Reaper's cloak rustled in the still air, and for a moment, Elias felt as if he stood balanced on the edge of a knife between survival and doom. The lead scout snarled, raising their weapon again as if to cut through all doubts with a single act. Elias braced, every nerve screaming, heart hammering against his ribs. The Reaper's shadow stretched across the clearing, long and heavy, swallowing the jungle light. Silence deepened until even the buzzing insects vanished. Then the Reaper spoke again, not to the scouts this time, but to Elias himself. Do you fear your chains, Elias Vance? The question burrowed into him, strange and personal. He opened his mouth, then closed it, words failing as he tried to understand. The scouts froze, sensing they had lost control of the moment. Elias, trembling but alive, realized that whatever the prophecy meant, the Reaper had no intention of letting it go unanswered. The Reaper did not move for a long time, and neither did the scouts. Elias stood awkwardly between them, trying to decide if he should scratch the itch on his ear or if any sudden movement might get him vaporized. The question still lingered in his head like an echo in a canyon. Do you fear your chains, Elias Vance? He wanted to ask what chains, because the only thing holding him down right now was fear and mud, but something told him the Reaper was not looking for literal answers. The scouts whispered in their own language, nervous and unsettled, until finally the leader barked an order. Their voices sharpened, but their weapons stayed lowered, as if they dared not defy the figure standing silently among them. Then, almost comically, they began setting up a small camp around the crash site. Elias blinked in disbelief. After trying to kill him, they were now unpacking supplies like a picnic. He muttered under his breath that aliens had a weird sense of hospitality. As dusk fell, the scouts lit pale blue flames that hissed without smoke. Elias sat near the wreck, still guarded but no longer under immediate fire. His stomach grumbled loudly, betraying him, and one scout tossed him a ration pack with a grunt. He sniffed it suspiciously before biting into something that tasted like a cross between cardboard and sadness. He grimaced but kept eating. At least it wasn't lethal, which was an improvement over his days so far. Across the campfire, the Reaper sat unmoving, as though firelight itself dared not touch its cloak. Finally, Elias couldn't stand the silence. He looked straight at the hooded figure and said, "So you just show up, save me from being fried, and then drop cryptic lines like a fortune cookie? What exactly is your deal?" The scouts glared at him as though speaking so casually to the Reaper was suicide, but the Reaper tilted its hood ever so slightly toward him. "I taught you," the Reaper said, and Elias almost choked on his ration. "Taught me what? I'm terrible at just about everything. If you taught me, you're a lousy teacher." The Reaper made a sound like a sigh that had drifted across centuries. "Not strength, not weapons, not victory. I taught you survival. Stubbornness against the impossible. The will to stand where no other would." Elias threw up his hands. "Great. So my superpower is being too stubborn to die. That explains my dating life, at least." Some of the younger scouts tilted their helmets, as if unsure whether the human was brave or just suicidal. The Reaper ignored the sarcasm. "You endure, Elias Vance. That is why you were chosen." Elias blinked. "Chosen? I don't remember signing up for this. I barely passed gym class, and now I'm supposed to be, what, some prophetic chain breaker." The scouts seized on that word. "Prophecy." The leader's voice rang sharp again. "He cannot be trusted. The prophecy must be broken here." Elias groaned and slapped his forehead. "Do you people ever get tired of quoting that prophecy? It's like arguing with a cult that only knows one sermon." He glanced around at the alien soldiers and then back at the Reaper. "What exactly do you want from me? Because I'm about one nervous breakdown away from curling up in a ball." The Reaper gave no answer, only stared, or at least Elias felt stared at, even if he couldn't see eyes in the darkness of that hood. The silence pressed against him, more unsettling than any threat. The next morning, the scouts decided to test him. At first Elias thought they were going to execute him after all, but instead they shoved a spear into his hand and gestured toward the jungle. He tried to protest, insisting he was more of a sit-in-a-bar-with-a-drink kind of guy, but they pushed him forward. Apparently, he had to prove he was worthy or dangerous or cursed, and Elias wasn't sure which option was worse. The Reaper followed silently, a shadow gliding behind the group, and that alone kept the scouts from killing him outright. They marched until they reached a swamp alive with glowing insects and bubbling gas. One scout pointed at a beast lurking under the water, a hulking shape with too many eyes. Elias's mouth dropped open. "You want me to fight that? With a stick?" The scouts nodded, grim and expectant. The Reaper said nothing, which was somehow even less comforting. Elias tried to muster courage, but what came out was sarcasm. "Perfect. I always wanted my obituary to read eaten by alien swamp monster." He stepped cautiously into the muck, holding the spear like a man who had seen other people use one in movies but never actually tried it himself. The beast rose from the water, slime dripping, eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. Elias's heart nearly exploded in his chest. He jabbed the spear awkwardly, missed entirely, slipped in the mud, and landed flat on his back. The scouts muttered in disgust. The beast lunged, jaws wide, and Elias did the only thing his brain could muster. He threw the spear away and punched the beast right in its nearest eye. It roared, recoiling in pain, thrashing back into the water with a hiss. Elias lay gasping in the mud again, blinking at the absurdity of what just happened. He muttered that this was the dumbest survival strategy ever invented, but apparently it worked. The scouts were stunned. Their mutters grew into confusion. They had expected failure, perhaps death, but not clumsy success. The Reaper finally broke its silence. Survival through defiance. Even when unarmed, he does not surrender. Elias pushed himself up, covered in slime, and shouted, "I didn't win, I just annoyed it enough to leave." "That's not defiance, that's dumb luck." The Reaper almost sounded amused. "Luck is just another word for inevitability." Elias groaned. "If you keep talking like that, I'm going to need a translator for philosophy." As they trekked back to camp, the jungle shifted around them. A mechanical hum grew louder, unnatural among the alien life. The scouts froze. Elias squinted at the treeline until a glint of metal caught the light. A massive drone, bristling with weapons, hovered into view. It scanned the wreckage site with ruthless precision, red sensors pulsing. One scout cursed under their breath. "An Imperial hunter. It has come for the human." Elias's stomach plummeted. "Wonderful. So now I'm not just a walking prophecy, I'm also bait for killer machines." The Reaper stood motionless, but Elias could feel an intensity radiating from it, as if the appearance of the drone had been expected all along. The scouts scrambled into defensive positions, energy rifles glowing. Elias clutched his empty hands, panic welling. He had survived a crash, a firing squad, and a swamp monster, but the way the drone locked onto him with mechanical malice told him survival was about to become even harder. The Reaper's cloak stirred, and Elias knew this was no longer a test. This was the beginning of the hunt. The hunter drone hovered in the clearing like a predator that knew exactly where its prey was hiding. Its body was a nightmare of metal angles and weaponry, humming with energy fields that shimmered against the damp air. Red sensors flickered as it scanned, and when its gaze fell on Elias, he felt as if the machine had already carved his name onto a grave. The scouts whispered curses, their rifles humming nervously. Elias looked from the drone to the Reaper, then back to the scouts, then finally down at his empty hands. "Of course," he muttered. "They bring a flying arsenal to hunt me and I'm armed with optimism and bad posture." The drone fired without warning. A beam of searing light scorched through the air, obliterating a tree into splinters where Elias had been standing 2 seconds before. He dived sideways, rolling across the mud and colliding with a scout who shoved him back in disgust. The clearing erupted in chaos as energy bolts flew, scouts firing in disciplined bursts while the drone's shields flared with each impact. The machine retaliated with terrifying precision, its cannons cutting through cover as if it were paper. Elias ran, zigzagging between explosions, his breath burning in his chest. "Why does it only shoot at me?" he screamed, though nobody had the time to answer. The Reaper watched silently, unmoving, its shadow stretching across the battlefield as if waiting for something. The jungle offered little shelter. Every time Elias thought he had found safety, the drone's sensors locked onto him again. He ducked behind a fallen trunk, panting, when a scout slid beside him. The alien barked a word he didn't understand, then shoved a spare rifle into his hands before charging out again. Elias stared at the weapon like it was a live snake. He hated rifles, hated the thought of killing, but right now the alternative was being vaporized. He aimed shakily, squeezed the trigger, and managed to scorch the drone's side. The shot glanced harmlessly off its shields, but it got the machine's attention. Elias's stomach dropped. Bad idea. The drone turned on him, weapons charging, and Elias bolted before the tree trunk exploded into ash behind him. The Reaper finally moved, stepping into the chaos with unhurried grace. The drone hesitated, its sensors twitching as if confused by what it detected. For the first time, its humming faltered, a note of static breaking the rhythm. Elias ducked under a burning branch, watching in disbelief as the cloaked figure simply raised one hand. The jungle grew still again, shadows bending toward the Reaper like grass leaning into wind. The drone's system sputtered, its sensors flashing wildly, and for a moment Elias thought the fight was over. Then the machine screeched, a digital roar that rattled his bones and doubled its firepower. Beams tore through the ground, forcing scouts into retreat. The Reaper stood unscathed, but Elias knew the drone wasn't going to stop until it had either killed him or destroyed everything around him. As Elias scrambled through the smoke, His panic spilled over into anger. He shouted at the Reaper, his voice raw. "If you taught me survival, now would be a great time for a lesson." The Reaper turned its hood slightly, as if considering him, then spoke in its hollow voice. "Lessons are not given. They are earned." Elias groaned. "Fantastic. The teacher from hell." He grabbed the rifle again and fired wildly, not to hurt the drone but to draw it away from the wounded scouts. Somehow it worked. The machine locked on, chasing him deeper into the jungle. Branches snapped, ground erupted behind him, and Elias realized with sickening clarity that he had just volunteered to be bait. He ran until his lungs screamed, diving into a ravine lined with jagged rocks. The drone followed overhead, weaving between trees with mechanical grace. Elias stumbled, nearly falling, when he heard the voice of the Reaper inside his head rather than his ears. "Do not run from death. Shape it." He gritted his teeth. "Easy for you to say you are death." He slipped behind a boulder, chest heaving, and tried to think. The drone was fast, armed, and shielded. He had nothing. Then his eyes fell on the environment around him, the ravine walls dripping with sap that glowed faintly, vines strung tight as cables, boulders perched precariously above. A stupid idea sparked in his head, the kind that had kept him alive this long. If the drone had locked onto him, then maybe he could use himself as bait one more time. Elias scrambled out of cover, shouting insults at the drone. "Hey, toaster oven! Come get me!" The machine obliged, weapons firing. Elias darted through the ravine, weaving under vines and past dripping sap. He grabbed a loose vine and tugged hard, snapping it free, then sprinted to a boulder hanging by a fragile root. The drone charged its cannons, lining up for the kill, when Elias threw himself against the rock with every ounce of desperation he had. The boulder cracked free and plummeted. The vine, slick with sap, wrapped around the drone's leg as the boulder yanked it downward. The machine screeched, thrashing against the pull, just as sap ignited from the heat of its cannons. Fire erupted, swallowing the ravine in a violent blast. Elias hurled himself into the mud, shielding his head as the explosion roared above him. When the smoke cleared, the drone lay half buried under rubble, its systems sparking, limbs twitching weakly. Elias staggered to his feet, ears ringing, body aching. He coughed through the haze, looking at the smoldering wreck. His legs wobbled, but he managed a shaky laugh. "See?" he gasped. "Dumb luck strikes again." He raised the rifle to finish it off, but before he could pull the trigger, a blast of energy tore through the clearing. The drone's chest glowed, then shattered as the Reaper's hand lowered slowly. The machine went still, its red sensors flickering out like dying embers. The Reaper stepped beside Elias, silent and towering. Elias panted, mud dripping off his chin. "You couldn't have done that 10 minutes ago?" The Reaper's voice came low and cold. "I needed to see if you would run." Elias wanted to argue, but exhaustion stole the words. He just collapsed into the mud again, muttering that his life had become one long audition for a role he didn't want. The scouts arrived minutes later, battered and burned but alive. Their leader looked at Elias with something new in their gaze, not respect, but wariness, as though the prophecy was unfolding in real time before their eyes. Elias, still lying on his back, lifted a hand weakly. "Don't thank me," he croaked. "I'll charge later." None of them laughed, but their silence was heavier now. They had seen him draw the machine into a trap, seen him survive what should have killed him 10 times over. And in the quiet aftermath, Elias realized that survival was no longer enough. Whatever the Reaper intended, whatever the prophecy promised, the galaxy was starting to take notice of him. The night after the drone's destruction was thick with unease. The scouts sat around their pale firelight, weapons close, eyes never straying far from Elias. Their voices dropped to whispers he could barely hear, heavy with tension. Elias sat apart, legs trembling from exhaustion, arms covered in scratches, mind still replaying the sight of the ravine exploding around him. He tried to rest, but the weight of their stares pressed harder than any wound. Even the Reaper's silent presence nearby felt more suffocating than protective. Finally, Elias broke the quiet, his voice rasping. You're all looking at me like I'm the plague. One of the younger scouts hissed something, and the translator clipped out the words. Not plague. Catalyst. The leader silenced them with a sharp gesture, but Elias had caught enough to feel his stomach twist. He demanded answers, louder now, tired of cryptic prophecies and silent guardians. Someone tell me what this prophecy actually means. Why me? Why humans? The Reaper's hood tilted slightly, and for the first time, it spoke more than fragments. Long ago, it said, humans were not the forgotten wanderers they are now. They stood at the edge of extinction countless times, yet each time they endured. They learned from fire, plague, and war, and I watched them. I guided their survival, shaped their defiance. Elias blinked, stunned. Wait. Are you saying humanity owes its stubborn streak to you? The Reaper's cloak shifted in the firelight. I taught them how to bend without breaking. They became a species that mocked death itself. But I left them when the Empire rose. Without my hand, they fell into ruin, scattered to myths and warnings. Elias laughed bitterly. So humans are basically the universe's bad memory, and I'm the unlucky idiot keeping the rumor alive. The scouts muttered again, this time more openly, as if the Reaper's confession only fueled their fear. The prophecy says a human will undo the Empire's chains, one growled. If the Reaper shaped your kind, then you are worse than the stories. Elias stood, fist clenched, anger boiling through exhaustion. I didn't ask to be part of your empire, your prophecies, or your chains. I just wanted to survive a crash. The Reaper rose as well, towering over him, shadows curling at its feet. And yet you have survived more than death itself, it said. That is why the Empire fears you. Elias stepped closer, trembling but defiant. Maybe I survived because I'm too stubborn to quit, not because you chose me. The Reaper regarded him with silence that felt almost approving. The conversation might have ended there, but a scout suddenly cried out, pointing toward the dark horizon. A distant light burned in the sky, cold and sharp, not the glow of jungle storms but the steady glare of engines. A warship descending? Panic rippled through the camp. The Empire has been called, one shouted. They will come for the human. Elias spun toward the scouts, furious. Which one of you called them? He didn't need an answer. The guilty scout was already backing away, helmet glinting in the firelight, weapon half raised. Elias recognized the look of someone who had made a deal with devils. You've doomed us all, he spat, but the traitor only hissed that the Empire would reward them. The Reaper's gaze turned upon the scout, and they froze mid-step, trembling as shadows pulled at their feet. Without a sound, the scout dropped to their knees, eyes wide with terror, but the Reaper said nothing more. Death had not claimed them, but the message was clear. Betrayal was not forgiven. Elias paced the camp, panic rising. An Empire warship meant more drones, more soldiers, and no chance of hiding. His hands shook as he raked them through his hair. Running isn't an option. Fighting isn't an option. We're all going to be ashes. For once, he found no humor to soften the truth. The Reaper's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. You have a choice, Elias Vance. Run from your fate, or stand and shape it. Elias froze. He thought of the drone, of the swamp beast, of the scouts' rifles, of every moment he should have died but hadn't. He thought of humanity, forgotten and forbidden, remembered only as a curse. His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. Then I stand. If I'm going to be the cursed human, then I'll be one they remember for more than fear. The scouts looked at him as though seeing him for the first time, not as prey or prophecy, but as something unpredictable. Some turned their rifles toward the treeline, preparing for what was coming. Others shifted uneasily, still bound by fear. But none moved to kill him. The warship's engines roared louder, and lights pierced the canopy. Trees bent under the blast of heat as the vessel descended. Elias's heart pounded, but he steadied his breath, clinging to a reckless idea. He turned to the scouts and spoke with a confidence he did not feel. You want to see if the prophecy is real? Then fight with me. You've seen I don't die easily. Maybe that's enough to make the Empire bleed. They hesitated, torn between fear of the Empire and fear of the prophecy. But one by one, rifles lifted. The leader growled something sharp, and the translator spat the words. "If you fall, we fall." Elias managed a grin despite his terror. Well, no pressure then. The ground trembled as the warship's bay doors opened. Metal pods streaked downward, slamming into the earth. From them unfolded soldiers in polished armor, their visors glowing red, rifles crackling with energy. Their commander stepped forward, voice amplified and cold. "By order of the Empire, the human is to be delivered. All others may leave or perish." The scouts tightened their grips on weapons, their hesitation burned away by the ultimatum. Elias stepped forward, mud-streaked, bruised, but unbroken. His throat was dry, but he forced out words loud enough to carry. "If you want me, you'll have to earn it." His attempt at bravado was undercut by a nervous cough, but the Reaper's presence beside him gave the moment weight. The Empire soldiers shifted uneasily, their sensors faltering when they registered the cloaked figure at his side. The standoff was about to erupt into bloodshed when the Reaper leaned down, whispering so only Elias could hear. "Do you see now why you endure?" Elias swallowed hard, but his answer came clear. "Because if I don't, no one else will." The Reaper straightened, cloak billowing though no wind blew, and for the first time, Elias felt its approval not as silence but as something deeper, almost like pride. The warship loomed above them, soldiers prepared to descend, prophecy poised to unfold. And Elias, exhausted, terrified, yet standing tall, realized that survival was no longer enough. The time had come to fight not for his own life, but for the legacy of a forgotten humanity. The first shot came from the Empire soldiers, a brilliant arc of energy that seared the ground between Elias and the scouts. It was not meant to kill but to warn, though the jungle hissed as the heat licked across roots and vines. The commander stepped forward with an air of practiced certainty, visor gleaming, voice amplified into a chilling decree. "Hand over the human and be spared. Defy us and meet oblivion." The words carried the weight of countless conquests, but Elias heard only the empty arrogance of an empire too used to obedience. His legs shook, his chest felt hollow, but he forced himself to step forward, mud dripping from his boots as if each movement were an act of rebellion. "You'll have to take me," he said, his voice rough but steady. Behind him, the scouts stirred uneasily, caught between instinctive fear and the pull of something larger. The Empire's soldiers moved in formation, rifles raised, shields flickering into place. The scouts raised their weapons in return, their leader barking sharp commands. The clearing became a powder keg waiting for a spark. The Reaper, silent until now, stood motionless at Elias's side, shadows rippling outward like black tides. Its presence bent the air, and even the Empire soldiers faltered for a heartbeat, though none dared to lower their weapons. Elias's heart thundered, but he grinned in a way that was more madness than bravery. If this was the end, he thought, then he would meet it laughing at the absurdity of surviving everything else only to die in someone else's prophecy. The battle exploded without warning. Energy fire lit the night, searing beams carving through trees and dirt, the air filled with smoke and the smell of scorched earth. Scouts darted into the jungle, firing from cover, while Empire soldiers advanced with mechanical precision. Elias threw himself behind a half-shattered trunk, clutching a discarded rifle with hands that still shook. He fired clumsily, the recoil jarring his arm, but managed to catch one soldier's shield and force them back. He shouted something incoherent, part defiance, part panic, as blasts tore the ground around him. Mud splattered, branches cracked, and every second felt stolen. The Reaper finally moved. It glided forward, raising a hand, and the battlefield bent around it. Shadows swallowed blasts of energy, turning lethal beams into sputtering sparks. Soldiers recoiled, their formation breaking, and fear cracked through their discipline. The Reaper's voice rolled across the chaos. "Death has no master but itself." The words froze soldiers in place, and Elias seized the moment, sprinting from cover with a reckless laugh. He grabbed another rifle from a fallen scout, dual-wielding in a way that was more ridiculous than effective, spraying fire that forced soldiers back. His aim was terrible, his footing worse, but somehow he kept moving, kept fighting, as if sheer refusal to fall gave his shots weight. The Empire's soldiers regrouped, focusing their fire on Elias. He felt the heat of blasts singe his hair, scorch his clothes, but he refused to stop. The Reaper's shadow shielded him at the last instant each time, turning death into a near miss. Still, Elias knew this was not sustainable. His body ached, lungs burned, and he could feel his strength draining with each frantic step. Yet somewhere deep inside, something shifted. For the first time, he was not running for his own life. He was standing for the scouts who had once tried to kill him, for the memory of humanity scattered across the stars, for every moment of survival that had led him here. His voice cracked as he shouted above the din. "You want your prophecy? Fine. Here I am. Come take it." The commander strode forward, igniting a blade of energy, sweeping aside scouts like toys. Their visor fixed on Elias, voice cold and absolute. "The Empire does not fear you, human. You are nothing but myth and inconvenience." Elias, panting, raised his rifle and shot, the blast glancing off the commander's shield. He coughed a laugh. "Good to know I'm at least an inconvenient myth." The commander lunged, blades slicing through air. Elias barely dodged, tumbling into the mud, scrambling to his feet with desperation clawing at his throat. The commander pressed forward, strikes relentless, until Elias tripped back against a boulder. The blade arced downward. Then the Reaper's hand caught it mid-swing. The battlefield froze. The commander strained, but the blade would not move. The Reaper's voice came low and final. "This human is mine." Soldiers faltered, rifles lowering in dread. Even the scouts stared, caught between awe and terror. The commander snarled, demanding why the Reaper would protect such a fragile, ridiculous creature. The Reaper answered without hesitation. "Because he endures. Because he is what I shaped, and now he is what I need." Elias blinked, chest heaving. "Need? What do you mean, need?" The Reaper's hood turned toward him, and for the first time, Elias felt truth rather than shadow in its words. "You will be my successor, Elias Vance. The one who mocks death until death itself bows." The offer, or curse, hung heavy in the air. Elias's mind reeled. Successor? Apprentice? He had spent his whole life stumbling through disasters, surviving by luck and sarcasm. And now the embodiment of death wanted him as its heir? He laughed weakly, half hysterical. "You've got the wrong guy. I can barely keep my boots tied." The Reaper's cloak swirled. "That is why you are perfect." Elias's grin faltered as the weight of the choice pressed down. To accept would mean becoming something no longer human. To refuse might mean losing everything, perhaps even the fragile chance at survival he still clung to. The Empire's soldiers stepped back, sensing the prophecy's teeth sinking into reality. The scouts stared, waiting for his answer. Elias, drenched in mud and blood, looked from the Reaper to the commander still trembling under its grip. He thought of humanity, forgotten and forbidden, and of every absurd miracle that had kept him alive. Then he shook his head. "I'm human," he said. "Stubborn, reckless, stupidly alive. That's who I am. You can keep your throne of shadows." The Reaper was silent for a moment, then a sound emerged that might have been laughter, hollow and ancient. "Very well. If you will not be death, then be its defiance." With a sweep of its hand, the commander's blade shattered, and soldiers broke ranks, fear overwhelming duty. The warship above roared as if sensing the shift, engines straining, but the troops retreated, unwilling to face a prophecy fulfilled. Within minutes, the clearing was empty but for the broken, the burned, and the survivors. The scouts lowered their weapons slowly, looking at Elias with something between awe and dread. He staggered, mud dripping from his face, then managed a crooked grin. "Figures. I survive everything but my own bad decisions." The Reaper stood beside him, its shadow vast, its presence less suffocating now, almost companionable. It whispered so only Elias could hear. "That is why you are perfect." Elias laughed tiredly, shaking his head. "Perfect. Right." He turned toward the jungle, scarred and battered but unbroken. Whatever came next, He knew he would face it as he always had, grinning at the impossible and refusing to fall. And somewhere in the silence, the Reaper's hollow chuckle followed him, as if death itself had finally found its favorite joke.